Hi, I'm Tom Serb, Director of the Midwest Music Academy. In this video, we'll explore the changes to music notation that occurred during the Baroque era, a period that lasted from approximately 1580 to 1780. The Baroque era saw the birth of music requiring larger groups of musicians, including the opera and the concerto. When many musicians and singers are performing together, timing is critical. This led to 4 different developments. First, instrumental music was becoming more prominent. Since instruments can run through a series of notes much quicker than a singer, we created shorter notes by adding flags to note stems. Each flag cuts the time value of the note in half. Second, bar lines were used to divide music into measures. You'll see vertical lines in music as far back as the medieval period, but those were used to mark pauses. The longer the line, the longer the pause. The Baroque era extended the lines through the entire staff and used them as a mark to help musicians count complicated music together. Third, because the bar lines replaced the earlier symbols for pauses, we needed new symbols to represent periods of silence. Rests were developed, with each note getting a corresponding rest of the same length. And fourth, the circles, dots, and lines that had been used to show the way beats were grouped or divided were replaced with fractional time signatures. The lower number represented the type of note that would receive one count. The American names for the notes are drawn from these fractions. The British use a system stemming from the older Latin names. The upper number of a time signature represented how many counts would be in each measure. Combined with the bar lines, this let large groups of musicians play together accurately. There was also one cosmetic change. In the Middle Ages, we had used reed pens, and with a reed pen, it was easier to draw a square or a rectangle. With the quill pens in use in the Baroque era, it was easier to draw a circle or an oval, so the shape of our note heads changed to the ovals that we use today. The texture of music went through a big change. The Notre Dame school of composers like Leonin and Periton harmonized chants with 2 or 3 additional voices. The Baroque era extended this much further. Harmonies were created by the different voices overlapping, but the voices were the main event, and we called this texture of music polyphony, which means many voices. During the Renaissance era, church music was still using 4 scales drawn from Gregorian chant. Secular music used 2 additional scales that we call major and minor, and during the Baroque era, composers began to use these 2 scales extensively in the music they wrote. The earlier development of sharps and flats allowed composers to transpose or change a scale to a different starting pitch. Because we tuned instruments differently during the Baroque era, each transposition had a unique sound. This led composers to favor particular keys to suggest certain emotions. Instructions for which keys go with which emotions are found in the books of Johann Mattheson, Marc-Antoine Charpentier, and Christian Schubert. The lists were not identical. This is Charpentier's. The occasional flats or sharps found in earlier music became a regular thing. Although we understood what sharps and flats belonged to each major scale, we had not yet standardized the order, so you might see unfamiliar arrangements of them in key signatures. Minor key signatures were frequently written with 1 fewer flat or 1 more sharp, because the 6th note of minor scales is frequently raised. Today we handle that with accidentals within measures, but then many composers used the key signature. This is from Bach's French suites, and it's in C minor with just 2 flats. A frequent feature of Baroque music was the use of a basso continuo, an unspecified group of musicians accompanying the melody. The basso continuo provided a bass line for the composition and used symbols called figured bass to indicate the chords. Figured bass isn't used for performance today, but it is frequently used for analyzing pieces of music. The harpsichord was an important Baroque instrument, but it was not capable of sustaining sounds the way a piano does. Composers developed a number of decorative figures called ornaments to help fill in the time until the next main melody note. The Baroque era saw the development of many of our musical forms, including the concerto and sonata. Because musical forms often include repetition, we developed repeat signs, and the notations for da capo and dal segno. We started including instructions for not only what sounds to play and for how long, but how they should be played. We start seeing instructions for tempo, slurs between notes, legato and staccato phrasing, dynamics, With the exception of figured bass and ornaments, all of the elements of Baroque music are still used in music today. In the next video, we'll look at the developments in notation that occurred during the classical, romantic, and modern eras. Until then, I'm Tom Serb from Midwest Music Academy.